Hi, and welcome to Keep It Simple Programming. Today, we will be talking about for loops and while loops. A loop is for iterating over a sequence. So with a loop, we can execute a set of statements once for each item in a list or for a desired amount of times. To create a for loop, we enter the following. For x in range 0, 10. And underneath that, we'll put print x. Okay, so what this is going to do, the 0 here is what's known as the starting position, and the 10 is what's known as the stop point. So what this is going to do is assign x to the starting point, which is 0, and it's going to come down here and print x. So it's going to print 0. And then it loops back up, and it's going to add 1 to that x. So now x is going to equal 1. Come down, print, loop up, add 1. So now x is going to equal 2, print 2, and it's going to continue that process until it gets to 10. So it's going to go x equals 9 plus 1, so now x equals 10, loop back up, and it's going to see that x is equal to the stopping point. So since x equals 10, it's going to skip the print function and move past it. So when we run this, we should see 0 through 9. Yep. So let's say we want to go in twos. We want to move up by 2 instead of 1 every time. What we're going to do is add after the 10 a 2. So now instead of going 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, it's going to go 0, 2, 4, 6, 8. So when we run this, we should see all the way up to 8, because once it goes from 8 to 10, it's going to see 10 is equal to 10 and skip the print function. And there we have it, 0 through 8 here. And then we could do that with any number. We could do it with 3, 4, 5, any number you want. Now, there are many more things you could do with the for loop. You could enter lists in there, you could add different conditions, things like that. But for now, we're going to stick with this, and we're going to move on to while loops. So a while loop will run while a certain condition equals true. An easier visualization of that is while So while this condition, whatever that condition is, it could be like with the for loop, while x is less than 10, do this, for example. So let's write it out. We'll go I equals 5, and while I is less than 10, print I. And with the while loop, it's not going to automatically add 1 each time. So we need to add this statement here, I plus or equal to 1. And what this is saying is it's basically just adding 1 to whatever I equals. So when we run this, we should see 5 through 9. And it only goes to 9 because of the same reason as the for loop. Once it sees 10, it's going to break out of that loop and go past the print. And say you want to go by 2s, you just put a 2 here, and what this is going to do is add 2 every time, 3, whatever you like. So let's see, when we run this, you got 5, add 3 to that, you get 8, and then the next one's going to be 11. Since 11 is greater than 10, it breaks out of that loop. Another thing we could do is use a break. So instead of adding 1 to 5 every time until it gets to 10, what we could do is enter a break. And what that's going to do is once it gets to print, it's going to go down to break, and instead of going back and adding 1 and running this while loop until I equals 10, it's just going to break right out of the while loop. So when we run this, we'll just see 5. And there are a couple reasons that we would want to use a while loop instead of a for loop. They both have their place, but without getting too far ahead of ourselves, there's something called user input. And that's basically when the user is entering something into the computer. And we'll actually be discussing that on the next video. But say we want a user to enter a username, and we want that username to have a capital in it and at least 1 letter in it, right? So we'll ask the user to enter the username, and we'll have an if statement in there. We discussed if statements in the last video. And if that username doesn't meet all the requirements, it'll ask the user to enter a new username, and it will keep asking them until they enter a valid username. And we don't know how many times it's going to take them to enter this value, so with the while loop, it'll just keep running until they enter a valid username. With a for loop, you're not able to do this because it's only going to run a certain amount of times. For that reason, while loops could be very helpful in some situations over for loops. And that was just a brief introduction to for loops and while loops. And that concludes today's video. I hope you found it helpful, and if you did, please click that subscribe button.